Eyes in the sky, watching us from space. Hundreds of satellites showing us the world like we've never seen it before. Capturing images which are breathtaking but bizarre. Objects and phenomena which defy explanation.
What is that?
A pyramid surrounded by geometric shapes in the Egyptian desert.
This pyramid looks nothing like what we've seen before.
Archaeologists get excited, but military analysts fear something sinister.
What worries the world right now is that a very radical group is taking control of the Egyptian government.
A ring in solid ice, 3 miles wide, on the oldest, deepest lake on Earth.
I think it's quite likely that there are species living in the depths of this lake that have not yet been discovered.
And have satellites discovered God's wrath in action?
I think there should be no doubt about the identification of Tal Hammam as biblical Sodom.
Baffling objects seen from space. What on earth are they? Flying over the Middle East, a satellite takes this picture of the area north of the Dead Sea. Analysts see nothing out of the ordinary, just an uninhabited clearing in the barren desert rock. But one archaeologist spots something others have missed. Dr. Stephen Collins is drawn to this ridge of mountains, encircling a flat plain of land. He thinks this unremarkable-looking disk is the last piece of the puzzle in his search for 2 lost biblical cities. The ancient cities of sin, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah were cities that had completely disavowed morality or the desire to take care of their fellow man, and God put an end to it.
The Old Testament describes the fierce anger of God. A storm of fire and brimstone raining down on Sodom and Gomorrah, leaving nothing but a wasteland of salt and sulfur.
There is no more graphic description of the wrath of God than the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
But could it all just have been a fable? A terrifying cautionary tale? Neither Sodom nor Gomorrah has been discovered. Archaeologists have searched the Holy Land in various areas around the Dead Sea. But Dr. Collins thinks they've been looking in the wrong place. He claims the flat plain, circled by mountain ridges seen in the satellite image, is the clue everyone has missed. Collins' theory is based on references in the Old Testament. According to biblical scholars, the city of Sodom was built on a fertile flat plain by the River Jordan, called Kikar. This Kikar has never been discovered. However, in Hebrew, the word Kikar also means a flat disk.
When you put the biblical description of the Kikar, the circle of the Jordan, together and compare that with a satellite image, you know that you're looking at exactly the same thing.
If Dr. Collins is right, and this is the disc-like plain referred to in the Old Testament, he may be zeroing in on Sodom. It's a controversial theory.
There are many clues as to where Sodom's located, and most of them don't point to this place where Dr. Collins is looking.
But Dr. Collins has another piece of evidence, a 6th century mosaic map of the ancient Holy Land, found on the floor of a church in the town of Madaba.
Look at this. This is very interesting. Here are 2 city representations northeast of the Dead Sea. We don't have the captions to the cities.
On the map is marked the city of Zoar, to which Lot and his daughters fled to escape God's wrath. But it's the 2 unnamed cities that intrigue Collins.
If Zoar is on the map, Why wouldn't we have Sodom and Gomorrah? Of course we would have Sodom and Gomorrah, and I think that's what these are.
By taking the map and reorienting it to the satellite image of the area today, these two unnamed ancient cities are found to sit in the middle of the circular plain to the north of the Dead Sea. The area Collins believes is the disc-like Kikar.
There isn't anything else that could possibly be on that location except for Sodom and Gomorrah.
But if the kinds of events described in the Bible did actually happen, you would expect to find some evidence of them down on the ground. At the circular clearing where the unnamed cities are located on the map, there is an ancient ruin known as Tal el-Hammam. Collins heads up the archaeological excavation of the site. What he discovers is the foundations of immense fortifications, covering 250 acres, and artifacts that dated back 4,500 years to before the Bronze Age. But there is something strange. There are no significant standing structures. Of the thick city walls and ramparts, only the jagged foundations remain.
There are no standing superstructures anywhere on that site. And it's not just because of time and tide that has eroded them away. They were literally blown off of their foundations.
There is also evidence of some catastrophic, destructive event.
When we first began excavating at Tal el-Hammam, one of the things we noticed was a massive destruction layer, an ash layer, and a debris layer that is over 1 meter in thickness over the whole site.
In that ash layer, they found objects like pottery, melted by immense heat.
We're talking about something more powerful than many, many atomic explosions.
The energy released was equivalent to 68 atomic bombs going off all at once.
The pottery is smashed to bits. Human beings are smashed to bits. Everything is burned to a crisp.
Is this evidence of God's wrath? A sinful people punished by devouring fire and brimstone from on high? Collins searches for an alternative, natural explanation.
The only natural event that can produce the effect that the Bible describes in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is a cosmic airburst event.
In a cosmic airburst, a meteor or large comet fragment explodes as it comes into contact with Earth's atmosphere.
It literally obliterates, incinerates, atomizes everything else.
The 3-foot layer of ash does suggest some devastating event. Collins believes there is only one reasonable conclusion.
I think there should be no doubt about the identification of Tal el-Hammam as biblical Sodom.
A bizarre ring, 3 miles wide, on the surface of the oldest, deepest lake on Earth.
There are thousands of species that have evolved to live in this lake, that live nowhere else in the world.
Is some ancient life form waiting to be discovered in the freezing waters of Siberia?
We don't know much about what exists deep underneath Lake Baikal.
April 23rd, 2009. The International Space Station is passing over the freezing cold wilderness of Siberia. From 220 miles up, an astronaut photographs Lake Baikal, the oldest lake on Earth. His camera scans the 25-million-year-old lake, grabbing snapshots across 12,000 square miles of icy water. When he sends the images back to Earth, something bizarre is revealed. A massive, almost perfectly circular dark ring on the surface. Back on Earth, astronaut Mike Barratt tries to make sense of what he witnessed.
I saw a very large ring structure that looked like a fracture pattern almost. It looked like somebody had taken a very large soda straw and just pushed on the ice. I had never seen anything like this.
Analysis shows that the ring is huge, measuring approximately 3 miles across. Also, whatever or whoever created this ring has cut or melted through 4 feet of solid ice.
What forces could lead to a circular fracture pattern like that?
It could be that there is some kind of thermal upwelling, and it heats the water. As that warm water rises and hits the ice underneath, it starts to generate this ring structure.
But for this natural explanation of the rings to be true, there would need to be a massive source of heat at the bottom of the lake. Could there be a volcano down there? Experts know of none, and there are no other telltale signs of volcanic activity. Scientists search again for some natural explanation.
It's the biggest freshwater lake, the deepest freshwater lake, the oldest freshwater lake at 25 million years old.
You compare that to the Great Lakes in the United States. They formed around 15,000 years ago.
Could the weird ring possibly be a sign of age? This is the oldest, deepest lake in the world. That means it has a huge amount of sediment.
It has incredibly thick layers of sediment in its bottom, upwards of 7 kilometers thick of sediment, as compared to maybe a few tens of meters of sediment in a typical lake.
Lake Baikal is teeming with animal and plant life. Over millions of years, every living thing in the lake ends up dead and decaying on the lake bed. The remains of countless trillions of plants and creatures form thick sediment like nothing else on the planet. Could the ring on the surface be the result of some strange chemistry occurring far below in the lake bed?
It's been noticed in other parts of the lake that methane gas has been rising from the sediments.
But a vast amount of methane would be needed to melt a ring 3 miles in diameter through 4 feet of solid ice. Searching for further clues, scientists study more satellite images of the lake going back in time. They discover more of the mysterious rings, varying in size and in different parts of the lake.
As they form and dissipate in different years, they seem to occur in different spots on the lake. And that, again, is a bit of a mystery.
Whatever is causing these rings, it's moving. Could some unknown living creature in the depths of the lake be responsible for the ring on the surface?
For the last 25 million years, there are thousands of species that have evolved to live in this lake, and there are now at least 1,000 species that live nowhere else in the world.
Isolated from the rest of the world, the unknown species in this giant lake have followed their own evolutionary path. We can only guess where it's led. Whatever is causing these rings, it appears to be generating incredible heat. Enough to melt thick ice and form a ring 3 miles wide. No creature known on Earth can do this. Scientists searching these isolated waters have discovered strange, alien-like plants and animals. Creatures with bizarre evolutionary traits. Creatures that glow or are transparent. But the great bulk of this vast lake remains unexplored and uncharted.
This lake actually has a very unique characteristic in that it is highly oxygenated. Because there is so much oxygen mixed into the water, it's able to support these giant amphipods, these giant flesh-eating crustaceans.
There are species living in the depths of this lake that have not yet been discovered.
If bizarre reports from the Russian military are to be believed, these unknown creatures are of the most extraordinary kind.
There was this encounter deep in the lake where Russian divers came across these strange humanoid figures.
3 Russian divers lost their lives in the incident. 4 others were injured. The survivors all claim to have been attacked by beings which they described as silvery and humanoid.
Now, these figures were apparently wearing helmets of some sort, and the clear implication is that we're dealing with intelligent life here.
The encounter was documented in an official Russian military report and reported in the Russian press. To this day, no one is sure what the divers saw.
Could there be other animals living deep down in this lake? Well, most certainly there are, but humanoid ones, I'm not so sure.
Lake Baikal is like a giant isolated evolutionary experiment. Its secrets are buried deep.
We don't know much about what exists deep underneath Lake Baikal.
The images caught by satellite remain unexplained. Whatever is creating the weird rings on the surface of Lake Baikal is still down there. A menacing cloud-shaped plume, 35 miles wide, appears over New Mexico.
What do we see in the exact same area? One of the biggest secret weapons testing sites in the United States.
It sends the internet into overdrive.
Some people were even saying that we should evacuate parts of the state.
March 2014. A weather radar detects a vast cloud-like plume traveling northeast across New Mexico. It appears in an instant, with no warning. Some blame radar error, but the U.S. Weather Service confirms the reading is accurate. They've just no idea where the plume has come from. Until it appeared, the skies had been clear. There's no storm, no clouds, no rain.
When I see something that I can say, no, this isn't a storm, I look for other possible explanations.
Alarmingly, the smoke, or whatever it is, grows rapidly to 35 miles in diameter. It moves over Texas, then dissipates over western Oklahoma. Meteorologists can't explain it. The plumes seem to burst from nowhere, like the result of a great explosion. It resembles something from a volcano. There has been recent volcanic activity in New Mexico, but it's 25 miles east of the point where the plume appeared. The image finds its way onto the internet, where investigative reporter Steve Douglas picks up the story.
I have a reputation of looking into the odd and the unexplained, and I was intrigued. I was very intrigued by it.
Steve starts investigating the mystery with his contacts online when he notices a rumor spreading. People suggest that the smoke-like cloud is coming from a facility used to store nuclear waste.
People were blogging about this. Some people were even saying that we should evacuate parts of the state.
But Douglas is a reporter. He knows better than to take rumors at face value, and he knows the plume can't be radiation.
A radiation cloud wouldn't be seen on radar.
Fallout is not visible. In fact, the folks who used to go try to find fallout clouds in planes, the only way they'd know if they were flying through a cloud is with a Geiger counter. It certainly wouldn't show up on radar.
But though fallout is not visible, a nuclear detonation would be. Douglas works back through the available data, aiming to reveal where the plume first appeared.
Using the data from the National Weather Service and also radars from Cannon Air Force Base, we're able to pin down the location.
What do we see in the exact same area? One of the biggest secret weapons testing sites in the United States, where the first atomic bombs were tested.
This is the White Sands Missile Range, where on July 16, 1945, scientists working on the Manhattan Project detonated the world's first atomic weapon. A 20-kiloton plutonium bomb. The site is still used by the U.S. government for weapons testing.
And I called the White Sands Missile Range, and they did not know what it was either, or at least officially they did not know what it was.
Given the nature of the base, Douglas wonders if they're trying to hide something, and whether this is smoke, the result of a secret underground nuclear test that went wrong.
I went looking for seismic activity, but the ground wasn't shaking, the earth wasn't moving.
The U.S. has not officially tested any atomic weapons since 1992. Could the plume be linked to other activity at the base?
The opportunity to begin eliminating the nuclear threat is within reach.
In 1983, President Ronald Reagan ordered military scientists to work on the Strategic Defense Initiative, the futuristic weapons project that became known as Star Wars.
Ronald Reagan was able to get the funds to pour billions into making nuclear missiles obsolete.
The plan was to build weapons that could destroy the missiles before they hit the U.S. The program became increasingly secretive. So could this plume be the result of some advanced weapon being tested at White Sands? Researching the weapon theory, Douglas studies multi-frequency recordings from the moment the plume appeared, and he makes a strange discovery.
And I recorded what sounded like just white noise. And I realized it had a pitch that rose and fell, which is indicative of a satellite. It started out low, became high, and then went low, and then was abruptly cut off.
There were some satellite traffic signals at that time, and one of them was flying by that area, giving off a signal, and went dead right at the same time.
Has the U.S. military used an exotic weapon to shoot down a satellite? A plume of smoke 35 miles wide is hard to keep secret, but maybe it wasn't meant to be. Relations between Russia and the West are worse than they've been since the Cold War, and senior figures in Russia have once again raised the specter of nuclear conflict.
Was this the Americans' way of saying to other governments, hey, look what we've got?
You have to assume you've got a Russian photo interpreter hunched over probably a 1970s era desk. Yeah, with an old ring phone, picks it up, cranks it up, and calls the Kremlin and says, I got a plume of smoke over White Sands.
Steve Douglas certainly believes this plume of smoke was meant to be seen, that it's an intentional play in a political game of show and tell between the U.S. and Russia.
We had a general idea that this is a very subtle message to Vladimir Putin that you may still have Cold War era nuclear weapons. We've moved way beyond that.
Huge stone geometric shapes on the Earth's surface, and in the center, a mysterious pyramid.
This is a strange one.
Is this a forgotten ancient structure?
This pyramid looks nothing like what we've seen before.
Or something more sinister?
This thing isn't a lost pyramid, it's a secret pyramid.
June 2010. The high-resolution Earth observation satellite QuickBird is flying 280 miles over the Egyptian desert when it captures this image. A large diamond shape, almost 2,200 feet across the diagonal. Inside the diamond is a circle with a diameter of 300 feet. Inside the circle is a cross, and at its intersection, a smaller object. It appears to be a pyramid.
If something looks very much like a pyramid, and it's in Egypt, it's probably a pyramid.
Satellites flying over Egypt have revealed no fewer than 17 previously unknown pyramids. But this one is located in Egypt's western desert, miles from the nearest ancient Egyptian settlement. And unlike other pyramids, it's surrounded by large geometric shapes.
This thing is quite mysterious. This could be a very important ancient site.
The base of the pyramid measures just 16 feet wide and is at the center of a cross, which looks like it's made of stone.
Finding a pyramid we didn't know about in Egypt, of course that's exciting, but this pyramid looks nothing like what we've seen before.
But if the ancient Egyptians didn't build this strange structure, who did?
We know, for instance, there are small pyramids in Nubia, this ancient kingdom south of Egypt, which did sort of imitate Egypt and built pyramids, but usually much smaller scale.
This is the same size and shape as a Nubian pyramid, but it's in the wrong place. The territory of the Nubians was much further south. And this pyramid is also too far from the River Nile, the nearest source of water. Large ancient building projects needed many workers, and workers need water.
There's no evidence for any kind of river. I mean, how could you have people living in the middle of the desert without any access to water?
Further analysis of the satellite image reveals other strange features at the site. Surrounding the pyramid and geometric shapes are a series of pockmarks. And close to the pockmarks are zigzagging lines, which look like tire tracks. But if this is a modern structure, the Egyptian authorities refuse to acknowledge it exists.
When you put all this together, the secrecy, the remote location, the tire tracks, what it all begins to look like is a secretive military facility.
The circles, they are probably from explosives, ordnance dropped from an aircraft.
What this looks like is a bombing range where combat pilots can practice their bombing and strafing on stationary targets.
It could perhaps be a bombing target, but there's something that doesn't quite fit.
Why build a pyramid right at the center of this structure?
It's that pyramid which analysts are struggling to explain.
One potentially intriguing connection here is that the only other military facility in the world that has a similar pyramid structure is the infamous Area 51.
America's top-secret military facility, commonly known as Area 51, is the subject of much speculation. The exact nature and purpose of the small pyramid which has been seen here is a mystery. Could satellites have captured Egypt's own version of Area 51? Or perhaps there's another reason Egyptian officials refuse to admit the site exists. They may not know it's there.
What worries the world right now is that a very radical group is taking control of the Egyptian government.
This area is so remote, it's exactly where you might try to gather together a secret army. This thing isn't a lost pyramid, it's a secret pyramid.
Whether a bombing target, a terrorist training site, or whatever else, this Egyptian pyramid is no longer secret. Whatever happens here, the eyes in the sky are watching. A satellite captures an island city, packed with buildings, but devoid of life.
What was once a bustling city and community is completely desolate and empty now.
What on earth happened here?
It's eerie. It's like a ghost town.
A satellite is orbiting high above the East China Sea. It captures this curious image. An island off the coast of Japan, 9 miles from Nagasaki. It measures 1,600 feet by 500 feet, the same size as Liberty Island in New York. But Liberty Island has just one house on it. This island has around 30 massive tenement blocks, enough to house over 5,000 people. That would make this the most densely crowded area on the planet.
People were quite literally living on top of each other.
But what's most intriguing is that on the satellite image, there are no humans. Not a single person can be seen. There's no movement. When the island is captured on satellite camera at night, there are no lights. This place was once teeming with people. Where have they gone? Journalist Max McConaughey is taking a boat to the island to investigate further. Japanese fishermen call it Gonkanjima, which means Battleship Island. And a battleship is just what it looks like. The real name of this island is Hashima.
Oh, what is this place? Look at these walls. Oh my God. It's unbelievable.
Packed onto this tiny island is block after block of cramped tenement housing. The buildings look like they've been attacked, but they haven't been demolished. Each crumbling building must have contained almost 200 people. And the island looks like it was abandoned in a hurry.
People left their TV, their phone. It's like someone was there an hour ago, 2 hours ago.
These aren't the only possessions people have abandoned. There are desks and chairs in a classroom. Sets of teeth left behind at a dentist's. Everywhere there are people's possessions scattered, from shoes to kettles.
There's children's toys even.
Until 2009, this island was off limits to the public. Now, witnesses to what happened here are coming forward. The story of this island is like a nightmare, and the nightmare begins when Japan attacks China in 1937.
日本の中国侵略戦争の中でのこの一般市民に対する扱いというのがですね、戦闘行為でないにもかかわらずですね、各地で起こりました。それの最も象徴的なものが南京。
The invasion of China was followed by Japan's entry into World War II. To fuel its war machine, Japan desperately needed coal. Hashima Island sits above rich deposits of high-grade coal. There had been a mining operation here since the late 19th century. Now the island was to be turned into a terrifying forced labor camp.
最初は朝鮮人も続いて中国人もこの連行してきたと。農民は農作業中にあるいはその農産物の輸送中などにいきなりこの拉致連行されたと。
Laborers were moved to the island by the hundreds.
朝鮮人の場合はですね、曲がりなりにもこの島のこの地下室など非常にこの湿気の多いですね。
To get to the coal, the slave laborers dug deeper and deeper, over half a mile underground, working long shifts with barely enough food to keep them alive.
ちょっとした抵抗運動をされて、それでもう3日3晩その一切、飲み物食べ物が与えられずに、しかもこの憲兵から後ろ切りつけられてですね、その鮮血が流れたと。
For some, it was too much. Their only escape was death.
Oh my God. You couldn't jump this and make it?
ソジョンさんがですね、 5、60人は海に身を投げて亡くなったっていうことを言っておられますね。
Incredibly, after the war, the island mine was not closed down. So hungry, impoverished, and desperate were people in post-war Japan that men and their families moved to the island to work in the mine. One of them was Tomoji Kobata.
住民たちっていうのはね、もう親子4人5人、もう本当にね、狭苦しいアパートだったんですけども、そのため、私が一番若かったんですね。もう若造は押し入れに寝ろって言われましてね、もう先輩方の言葉に従ってね、もう1年余り押し入れ生活したんですよ。
But in April 1974, Hashima was evacuated. Everyone on the island was quickly taken off. The official reason is that the coal mine was closing. But what remains a mystery is why it happened so suddenly.
It happened very quickly, and the only reason that happens is a bad reason. Maybe there was a disaster. Maybe somebody deemed the island unsafe and they had to leave. I think it was quick, and it might have even been violent.
For 35 years, this has been a forbidden island. What was once the most densely populated place on the planet, and the scene of unspeakable cruelty and torture, is now a ghost island. An image of a radiating triangle in the Australian outback goes viral on the internet.
One of the most commonly seen UFOs is a triangular-shaped craft.
Online communities find a controversial connection with one of the strangest places on Earth.
Some people say that there's a geometric relationship between these two areas.
Has a satellite discovered Australia's own Bermuda Triangle? February 2004. The Quickbird satellite is flying over Western Australia when it captures this image.
There's just this weird triangle in the middle of the outback. Not a lot of people live there, not a lot of activity going on. What exactly is it?
The image is published on the internet, and it excites wild theories of alien or paranormal activity.
One of the most commonly seen UFOs from all around the world is a triangular-shaped craft with lights at each corner. And now we see virtually the same thing in the Australian outback.
Among the more crazy conjecture, there is genuine intrigue from some investigators as to what this triangle is. One is Carl Gruber, a seasoned science journalist from Latin America, now living in Western Australia.
There's no way it could be natural. It's just too perfect.
The satellite image shows the strange triangle has sides that stretch to around 350 feet in length. In each corner and in the center is what appears to be glowing lights that form a regular pattern.
Someone or something made it. There's no doubt about that.
The only way to find out is to investigate the site from the ground. So Gruber heads deep into the outback.
Satellite coordinates are leading me to this remote place. This part of Australia is really weird. Not a whole lot of people come here. All kinds of weird things are supposed to have happened here.
But as a reporter, Gruber is interested in facts, not rumors.
I'm a science journalist. I have to go to the spot and see for myself.
What we do know is that pilots have reported strange events over this part of Australia. On October 7, 2008, Qantas Flight 72 suffered a sudden and dramatic computer system malfunction. The plane was plunged into a series of dives that threw its passengers around the cabin, causing over 100 injuries. no one has been able to fully explain this.
The onboard aircraft systems are so tested to the limit that you can't help but speculate that something external was involved.
This and other strange events lead to wild speculation. Gripped by the satellite image, online communities make a remarkable observation. This site in the Australian outback is on the direct opposite side of the planet to the Bermuda Triangle.
Some people say that there's a geometric relationship between these two areas.
Draw a line through the center of the Earth, and these two locations connect.
Could it be that there's something about the Earth, maybe the magnetic field, that does cause interference which could lead to the loss of a ship or an aircraft?
If Gruber can establish what the outback triangle really is, it might provide an answer.
It should be in that field somewhere.
But first, he has to find it.
Whatever that was taken with that photograph should be right here, right in front of me. But there's nothing here.
The triangle captured from space is around 350 feet wide and brightly lit. So where's it gone?
The only thing that's different now are those wind turbines over there.
Could people have mistaken the construction of a wind farm for this strange triangle? There's no turbine on the spot where Gruber has been led to by his GPS. But armed with this new information, satellite analyst Amanda Marchetti has a theory.
I think they were using some sort of antenna or some sort of sensor to test if this was an appropriate place for a wind farm. There's a very tall structure going up. You can see the shadow that it cast on the ground. What I think the three portions of that triangle are the cables that are just helping to keep that pole steady.
Marchetti's analysis adds up. The image and the proximity to the wind farm confirmed by Gruber support her theory. There are many strange, unexplained events in the Australian outback, but this satellite image may not be as bizarre as some internet communities believe. From space, it's an intriguing mystery. On the ground, it's case closed for Carl Gruber.